is the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen.
When I was reading your book and sort of doing a deeper dive on some of his more candid interview moments, trying to sort of analyze it from that perspective, because I think with the media, especially when you're the wealthiest man in the world, you're made to fall into a certain mold, right? So some people see him as a supervillain. And Amazon's immense power over the economic and retail landscape, is bound to create problems, right? In society, as anything does. So one of the, as I sort of read about him and sort of look into him, he is one of the most, I would say, well thought out individuals I think anybody's ever seen. It's almost there's a lot of overlap, and I'm a big Musk fan.
Okay.
There seems to be a lot of overlap between those two when you hear them speak. So one of the other things I sort of noticed is obviously Musk is very famous for his risk taking, right? I mean, and of course they're both involved, not coincidentally, in the two most significant civilians in space exploration are Musk and Bezos. What is it about, in terms of his like risk analysis and how he goes about risk? Because obviously he's not doing stupid things, even when he does fail. What separates him in that respect in terms of his risk analysis and his ability to, his tolerance for it and his setting himself up for success while taking big risks?
Well, a couple things. One is, I think strategic risk taking is kind of a key. It's not just, and you mentioned, it's not just throwing something against the wall and hope it works. He actually created processes internally to mitigate and minimize, or what I call protect the downside of whatever they're doing. One of those tools is called a 6-page narrative. So in 2004, Bezos banned PowerPoint and keynote presentations at Amazon. So to present an idea, that team presenting actually had to write out a maximum of a 6-page narrative, starting with a future press release and then going into frequently asked questions. And what he said was that requires people to think deeply before you ever start. So it's not like, let's try this, or, turn it over to the programmers and let's see what comes out. It's very thoughtful review. And again, understanding even with all of that, it may not work. And if you really look at Amazon, they've had lots and lots of failures.
Right.
But part of what he says is all those failures more than pay up for those successes, as he calls them, big bets that we make. And there are a number of them like that came out of failure, but ended up being big bets.
Right. And with the memo thing, that's particularly interesting to me, especially as, a lawyer who would, 90% of the job is writing. And I remember even reading that even at the sort of granular level. So you're sort of chastised if you have bad grammar or bad punctuation and things like that. So really taking your time to detail and write out, because, this is one of the things I realized later on in life as well, is that when you actually take pen to paper, I think it's even more helpful sometimes, or type out your ideas, and then you can challenge them and sort of go to like a very granular level of what you're trying to achieve and what you believe in. One of the interesting things I saw about him was he mentioned an example of being very adverse to talking about, the stock going up or down. Right. And so he takes a view of, well, if you want the stock price to go up, then what has to happen? Then one way to do it is, for in this example he gave, one way to do it would be to save on costs. Well, how do you save on costs? By being more efficient. Well, how do you be more efficient? By making sure there's less sort of deficient packages, because that takes up a huge portion of the pie. And then if you can do that, then you're going to have a more efficient company, which means the stock will go up. So that's kind of like, it reminded me of like the sort of Musk first order principles thinking, where it's like you get down to what are you trying to accomplish? Now get down to the first order of it in order to, and then work your way up from there. Is that sort of his approach with?
Yeah, I think so. And the way I would phrase it at Amazon, and he talks about this when executives, new hires come in from the outside, they're surprised at how little they focus in meetings on financials, meaning looking at financial statement. He calls those outputs. that we don't have much ability to change, but we do have ability to change the inputs.
Mhm.
So even like stock price, we can't change the stock price,
Right.
but we can focus on customer growth, customer satisfaction, fast delivery, right? All really the customer pillars that they have at Amazon. Those are the inputs. So they focus on inputs, not outputs, which again, so many CEOs today focus on how's the stock price doing this quarter. Well, Amazon, one of the other characteristics and principles is focusing on the long term, on being willing to apply long-term thinking, meaning not, he almost single-handedly changed how Wall Street looks at quarterly
Right.
earnings because he
Mhm.
doesn't care about quarterly earnings.
Mhm.
He does it because it's legally required. But he'll say, we're not going to make as much a profit this quarter, but 3 years from now, you'll see the impact of what we're working on today. So that long-term thinking, I think, is another key in terms of how Amazon has been able to grow.
Mhm. I think it's a very important point because I remember, and they're still on YouTube. You could look back, going years and years, even into like the 2010s, where you have sort of people making fun of him and scoffing.
Oh,
saying,
yeah.
"Well, you guys haven't created any profit. Are you ever going to create profit?"
Right.
And it was sort of taken as a foregone conclusion that this was never going to be a profitable company because and there were certain points in history where they were losing a lot of money on paper, and then their losses were expanding, and then he was more confident than ever, and you could see people sort of scoff at that.
Well, even
right.
the letter he wrote after that $6 stock price, the
Mhm.
crash, and the first line of the letter is "ouch."
Mhm,
It's been hard this year.
right.
And then he goes on to say, when I look at our fundamentals, right, looking back at inputs, he says, we're doing really well.
Mhm.
And I think early on, he intuitively, or just because he's so smart, understood that the internet in the late 90s was the land rush.
Right.
And that the one who got there and could grab as much territory would be the one long term that would survive and would win. And so it's not that they didn't make profit, but they poured everything back into building infrastructure, building transportation, logistics, better website, more product available for customers to come into. Everything was poured back into the company.
Mhm.
And most people didn't understand then.
Right.
Right. And he was willing to keep to what he thought was right and not change it because of that outside pressure.
Right. And forgive me for drawing the Musk analogy. I think that's someone that people understand a bit more because he's so open, right? And Bezos is a bit more reserved, and his, the time he gives to the media is a lot more limited, I would say. But again, it's just the parallels just keep ringing, right? Because here are the two of the most successful, most famous entrepreneurs. And again, it's like with Musk, they would laugh at him for years and years and years,
Right.
and say, you're never going to be profitable. You're never going to have, you're never going to meet your shipment guidelines and have X many cars on the road. And he kept missing his own deadlines, but he kept just delivering while everyone was making fun of him for not producing a profit.
Right.
And I think those two really have revolutionized sort of the thinking of being more long-term. The other thing that I admire, and I'm always sort of curious about, and want to hear your insight on this. With both of them, they have this uncanny ability to have like a 10-year, 100-year vision that they're executing on. And this is obviously illustrated by both their passions for the space industry as well, while also being maniacally focused on executing present day objectives. So they can have sort of both. That's a very hard balance. And
Yes.
what's your sort of insight on that? How does he sort of go about thinking about these things? Like, how does he have a 100-year time horizon and a single day time horizon at the same time?
Well, a couple thoughts come to mind just as examples. One is Bezos is building, and it's almost done, a 10,000-year clock on his ranch in West Texas. Literally a clock designed to run self-sustained for 10,000 years.
Wow.
Now, again, it's some people say it's just somebody with too much money, but for him, it's a reminder. And he partnered, and the name escapes me right now, with someone else as a reminder that we can't just have this short-term thinking. We need to think long-term. Even in his 1997 letter, he has this phrase that when he talks about hiring and people working at Amazon, he says it's hard to work here. We have goals, it's exacting, we want A players. And he says, because we're building something great, something we can tell our grandchildren about. So again, very early on, he's thinking long-term. So I think that's just part of who he is. I think Blue Origin, right, space company, similar mindset there. He's always been a space geek. He did a cameo appearance on a Star Trek movie. His grandfather, who he spent the summers with on his ranch in Texas, was head of what we now know as DARPA, Defense.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It wasn't DARPA at that point, but it was the beginning organization for the Defense Department Research and Development company. And so you can only imagine what the conversations were like. The local library in the Texas town had a great collection of science fiction. So he read all of that. So
was it near Houston or something? Is that why?
No, it's West Texas. It's in the middle of nowhere, Texas. So, again, that always infused with him. His high school valedictorian speech in Miami, Florida, was about how we need to create the mechanisms to move manufacturing into space so that the Earth could become a national park and we'd come and visit here. So again, long-term ideas. Blue Origin was, as he was, I think, making some money and realized, it's going to be a multi-generational, trek goal. But if we start now, we can build. And so Blue Origin started in 2000. I think Musk, SpaceX was close there. I think 2001, 2002, both with a similar long-term vision. Musk going to Mars, which Bezos disagrees with. He basically says the Earth is the best place we have. We need to protect it. But he wants, his whole goal with Blue Origin is to create the infrastructure so that in a future generation, somebody could start a space company in a dorm room. Because what he said was, we could start Amazon. I could start Amazon because we already had FedEx, UPS, and United States Postal Service. We already had credit cards. We already had the internet.
Right.
Amazon didn't have to build that infrastructure. We could build on top of it.
Right.
And that's his goal for Blue Origin and going to space. But, I think that's really, absolutely, he wanted to do that. Great. And that's just another step on the way to the ultimate goal of bringing the cost down to the point where you can have startup companies now figuring out how do we maximize space. And I think Musk and Bezos actually are more in line than what seems the press would like. They want to fight, so I'm not sure for Bezos. I don't think it's a competition as much as some of the press would like to build up.